What actually happens to the human body? After just 3 days without movement, most people assume it takes weeks to notice a difference. But the body doesn't wait that long. It begins adjusting within hours. And by the end of day 3, multiple systems have already shifted in ways most people don't expect. Understanding what happens during those first 72 hours reveals something important about how the body actually works and why movement matters far more than most people realize. So what is the body actually doing during those first 3 days? At first, nothing feels dramatically different. Sitting more, moving less, skipping a day of activity, the body seems fine on the surface. Energy feels normal. Muscles still respond. Nothing appears to have changed. But underneath that surface, something important has already begun. One of the first systems affected by reduced movement is blood circulation. Movement does more than burn energy. It plays an active role in how blood moves through the body. When muscles contract during walking, standing, or even minor physical activity, they act as a secondary pump. That pumping action helps push blood back toward the heart from the lower limbs, supporting the work the cardiovascular system does continuously. When movement drops significantly, that muscular pump slows down. Blood begins to pool more easily in the lower body. The veins in the legs become less efficient at returning blood upward. Circulation becomes less effective at delivering oxygen and nutrients to tissues throughout the body. This doesn't cause immediate pain or obvious symptoms. Most people feel nothing at all. There's no signal telling the body something is changing. No alarm, no warning. The shift is quiet, and that's exactly what makes it easy to overlook. But the efficiency of the circulatory system has already started to drop. And that's just the first change. Because at the same time circulation is slowing, something else is shifting, something that affects nearly every cell in the body. What happens to metabolism when movement stops? Movement plays a central role in how the body regulates blood sugar. Even low-intensity physical activity, standing at a desk, walking to another room, shifting posture, triggers muscles to absorb glucose from the bloodstream. This process, driven by a protein called GLUT4, helps keep blood sugar levels stable after meals and throughout the day. When movement stops, that glucose absorption slows. Blood sugar begins to stay elevated for longer periods after eating. The pancreas responds by releasing more insulin to compensate. Insulin sensitivity, the body's ability to respond efficiently to insulin signals, begins to decline. Researchers have found that even a single day of significant inactivity can begin to affect blood sugar regulation. By day 2 or 3, the effect becomes measurable. And here's the part that surprises most people. This happens even if a person exercises. Someone who runs for an hour in the morning but spends the rest of the day sitting can still experience these metabolic shifts because the body doesn't respond only to structured exercise. It responds to total movement across the entire day. Movement frequency matters more than movement intensity. But what about energy? Why does 3 days without movement make a person feel so much more tired? By the second and third day of low movement, the nervous system begins to reflect the change. Energy levels shift. Not dramatically at first, but noticeably. A general sense of heaviness begins to settle in. Motivation to move drops. The drive to get up and be active decreases. This is not simply a habit or a mindset. It is a biological response. The nervous system is constantly receiving signals from the body. When movement is regular, those signals reinforce alertness, motivation, and physical readiness. When movement disappears, the signals shift. The nervous system begins adjusting its baseline to match a lower level of activity. This creates a feedback loop that reinforces itself over time. The less the body moves, the less it wants to move. And the longer that loop continues, the harder it becomes to break. What starts as a few days of low activity can quietly extend into weeks. Not because of laziness, but because the body has begun recalibrating around a new, lower baseline. The motivation to move isn't just psychological. It's physiological. At the same time, the connection between the nervous system and the muscles begins to weaken slightly. Strength doesn't disappear in 72 hours, but the efficiency of muscle activation does begin to change. The neural pathways that recruit muscle fibers become slightly less responsive. Movements feel heavier, less fluid. The body begins losing some of its physical sharpness, not dramatically, but measurably. And then there's something happening even deeper, something most people don't associate with sitting still. Prolonged inactivity has been linked to increases in systemic inflammation. Inflammation is a normal part of how the body responds to stress, injury, and infection. But low-level chronic inflammation, the kind that lingers quietly in the background, is associated with a wide range of long-term health problems. Research has shown that extended periods of sitting and physical inactivity can trigger measurable increases in inflammatory markers in the blood. This inflammation doesn't show up as pain or swelling. It shows up as mental fog, fatigue, a general reduction in cognitive sharpness. That feeling of being slightly off, slightly slower, slightly less focused that often accompanies extended periods of inactivity. By the end of day 3, the body has shifted across multiple systems simultaneously. Circulation has become less efficient. Blood sugar regulation has become less stable. Muscle activation has decreased. Energy and motivation have dropped, and low-level inflammation has begun to rise. None of these changes are dramatic on their own, but together, they represent a meaningful shift in the body's baseline. Here's what makes this scientifically important and why researchers consider it significant beyond just fitness. The body is not malfunctioning during those 3 days. It is adapting. Human physiology is built around the principle of adaptation. The body constantly monitors its environment and adjusts its internal systems to match whatever demands are being placed on it. When movement is frequent, the body optimizes for movement, improving circulation, sharpening insulin sensitivity, maintaining muscle activation, and reducing inflammatory signals. When movement disappears, the body adapts to that instead. This adaptation happens faster than most people realize because, from an evolutionary perspective, prolonged inactivity was rare. The human body was built to move regularly across the entire day, not in short bursts, but in continuous low-level activity. Hunting, gathering, walking, building, farming, movement was constant. Modern life has changed that completely. Long periods of sitting have become the default, and the body responds to that shift the same way it always has, by adapting to whatever the new normal appears to be. What makes this particularly important from a longevity standpoint is what happens when these short-term adaptations are allowed to repeat. Each time the body spends several days with minimal movement, those same systems shift again. Blood sugar regulation dips. Circulation loses efficiency. Inflammation ticks upward. Over months and years, what begins as a 3-day response can quietly become a new physiological baseline, one associated with higher long-term risk for metabolic disease, cardiovascular problems, and accelerated aging. What the research consistently shows is that small, frequent movement throughout the day has a more protective effect on many of these biological systems than a single long exercise session, followed by hours of sitting, standing occasionally, taking short walks, breaking up long periods of stillness. These behaviors send repeated signals to the body that movement is still part of daily life. That signal, repeated consistently, appears to be one of the most important inputs the body receives for long-term metabolic and cardiovascular health. So what actually happens after 3 days without movement? The body begins adapting almost immediately. Circulation slows, blood sugar regulation weakens, muscle activation decreases, energy drops, inflammation quietly rises. None of it is dramatic. None of it is permanent, but all of it begins far sooner than most people expect. And what that tells us about human biology is something worth understanding. The body doesn't just respond to how hard a person exercises. It responds to how often a person moves.